Hey everybody, it's the Ioniq guy. Today we are doing a deep dive into the ongoing 48 amp, 11 kilowatt charging problem with overheating charge ports that's affecting Ioniq 5, Ioniq 6, Kia EV6, Genesis GV60. None of these cars are exempt from experiencing this issue, and I've been doing a lot of testing with my Ioniq 5 since I did discover that my car is affected by it. For most of the time that I've owned my Ioniq 5, I charged at 40 amps, or about 9.6 kilowatts. And for me, this was no issue. This was about the time that I got the Autel Maxi charger for reviewing, and at this point now I had two 50 amp capable EV6s sitting around, and I said, you know what, it's time to hardwire one of these, so I hardwired my ChargePoint Home Flex. Not only would this allow me to charge a little bit quicker, but there are fewer charging losses when you charge at a higher rate. And immediately, I started having issues with it overheating. It would start out at 11 kilowatts, and then after about a half an hour, 45 minutes, it would trip, and it would just stop charging altogether. Then I went and got some VCU and ICCU updates done to the car, and after those updates, it did begin derating, meaning it would start out at 11 kilowatts, and then it would jump down to a lower charging speed. Now, this was by design. Hyundai issued these updates so that even if you were charging at 11 kilowatts and it was overheating, it would still charge. So you wouldn't wake up the next morning with a car that didn't charge at all. So it would have charged, it would have just charged at a much slower rate. Now I just want to say, this is not an issue for me. I can charge on a level 1 charger at 15 amps and I can still recoup what I need to fully charge my battery on a daily basis. So it's not a big issue for me. But there's a lot of you who are experiencing issues where the car will not charge on 32 amps. It won't charge at 24 amps. It trips out after a few minutes. This means that if you have a commute that's, 50 to 100 miles, recouping that overnight is going to be a little challenging. So I said, you know what? I've got an Ioniq 5 sitting in my garage. I'm going to take my charge port apart and find some answers. And honestly, being able to check all this out on a car that is still able to charge was much more interesting and gave us a lot more information. So here's where it all begins. I tore apart the trunk area of the car and got down to the charge port. I took all the plastic shrouding around the conductors going to the charge port and opened the whole assembly up. So the first thing I wanted to check out was the cable and what size conductor and insulation thickness they used. And based on some of the markings of the cable, me and some other sleuths were able to determine the manufacturer of the wire. We found the spec sheet for it, and it is good quality cable. It's rated for 125 degrees C. It is cross-linked polyethylene. It's very durable. So after taking all these measurements, I found out that they used a 6mm squared or 10 gauge conductor going from the charge port to the battery management system. Now at first I said 10 gauge. That seems really small. And you would be right if you were talking about electrical cable for houses and following the North American Building Code. So in our homes, for a 48 amp EV6, which is on a 60 amp circuit, that requires a 6 gauge cable, which is 2 sizes up from a 10 gauge. So that is a beefy cable compared to a 10 gauge. Now I put out an email asking a bunch of electrical engineers to chime in on this, and for the most part, the consensus was that a 10 gauge cable is more than enough to carry 48 amps of current. I found some charts from cable manufacturers, and they show that a 10 gauge cable is rated for 70 amps at 125 degrees C, which is much higher than these cables are going to see. Now, even if you derate that by a factor of 80%, you're still talking about a 56 amp rating. And even beyond this, when looking at the spec sheet for Phoenix Contact's CCS1 charge port, which they sell to other auto manufacturers and they implement them into their EVs, they specifically call out 6mm squared or 10 gauge cable be used for the 2 high power AC charging cables going to that charge port. So at this point, it's safe to say the cable sizing in the car is perfectly fine. I had a hunch that it might have been undersized, but it really isn't. Another giveaway is that most EV6s or chargers utilize 10 gauge for their cables going from the wall unit to your car. So the next thing I wanted to look at was the charge port itself and the pins going to the charge port. So I first looked at the crimps and they looked good. They were solid. They're not soldered because you don't want solder for a high current or high temperature connection. And this was told to me by some electrical engineers. Okay, so the charging pins themselves look pretty good. They don't show any exceptional signs of wear. What could it be? So then I noticed next to one of the AC charging pins was this little black device with 2 wires coming off of it. And after doing a little bit of research, it is a thermistor, which measures temperature based on resistance. So now we have found the VCMS AC inlet temperature sensor. And what I wanted to do next was test it for accuracy. So what I did was I made an ice bath, I dunked it in ice water, and lo and behold, it measured about 32 degrees, which is the freezing point of water. I also put in another thermocouple into the ice bath just so I could verify that it was reading in line with that. Next, I boiled some water and put that in a double insulated mug and took the temperature close to boiling. And again, it was fairly accurate. So this led me to believe that the thermistor is accurately reporting temperature back to the car. So at this point, I kind of investigated everything that I wanted to look at. And so I decided I wanted to put some thermocouples along the inside of the cabling just so that I could monitor it while running some further charging tests. So the first one I placed was downstream from the charge port, several feet inside the wire loom, the protective cover that all these wires run through. So I ran the thermocouple in there a couple feet. The second thermocouple that I placed in the car is about 1 to 2 inches from the charge port itself. So it's fairly close to that thermistor reading the VCMS AC inlet 1 temperature. And I put that thermocouple there because I wanted to make sure that the thermistor was kind of in line with what that one was going to see fairly close by. So I got everything closed up, put it all back together, and then I decided to run some tests. So what happens next really took me by surprise. I plugged the car in and I watched it for about an hour and it didn't overheat. And then after 2 hours, still didn't overheat. Somehow I fixed my car's charging problem. Now I'm certainly not suggesting that anybody pulls apart their charge port just to try and do this. My hunch is that the pins got somehow pushed in just a little too much or bent just a little out of place, and me taking them out and reseating them was all it took to make a good solid connection between the charge port and the EVSE. But either way, I proceeded with further testing just to see what it was going to do. But before we get into the data, a word from today's sponsor, LinerX. With winter fast approaching, now is the best time to purchase some all-weather floor mats from today's sponsor, LinerX. LinerX is a Maryland-based company selling high-quality, laser-measured floor mats at a great price. They're made from TPE, which is a mixture of rubber and plastic, so they offer traction and flexibility as well as strength when you need to remove them, so you're not going to dump their contents all over your floor. If you've ever owned floor mats from, say, WeatherTech, then you know those are made from a much harder material that tends to warp over time. Not with LinerX. They also feature a simple and classy-looking pattern with a lip around the entire footwell so liquids won't spread around and get on your carpeting. I've been using their front and rear floor mats as well as trunk and rear seat liners for over a year now, and they've held up admirably. So these floor mats have gotten the Ioniq Guy seal of approval, and when anybody asks which floor mats to buy, I always recommend LinerX. Available on their website or Amazon through the links in the description. So I purchased a data logger that I could connect these 2 thermocouples to, also a ambient temperature thermocouple, as well as a 4th thermocouple measuring the temperature of the wire going into the car on the EVSE. So I hooked all these up to the data logger. I also connected the OBD2 scanner to the car so I could monitor the VCMS AC inlet temperature through my phone app. And I put that next to it and I recorded a bunch of data that I'm going to share with you guys now. So the very first test I ran was with my Autel Maxi charger at 48 amps. So I plugged it in and here's what we saw happen over an hour. Temperatures quickly rose and then they kind of plateaued. Maximum temperatures we saw after an hour on the AC inlet was about 143 or 142. And you can see that both the thermistor in the charge port itself as well as the thermocouple on the conductor going into the charge port are basically reading the same number. If I saw a big difference in temperature there, I'd be worried that the thermistor wasn't actually resting on that charging pin and making good contact, thus reporting an accurate temperature back to the car, which could potentially lead to a dangerous situation. But this gave me confidence that that was not going to be happening. So this charging session did not derate. It charged at 48 amps successfully for an entire hour. Now, this had never happened to me previously, so I was a little thrown off, especially after everything that I did. So the second test I did, I wanted to eliminate the charging cable as being any issue here. So what I did is I took the charging cable from my ChargePoint Home Flex, I disconnected it from that, and I wired it into the Autel Maxi charger. So now we'll be able to see if the cable has any effect on the temperature here. And looking at the data here, there's really not that much difference. The The temperatures here are a little bit higher, and that's because the car was soaked from that previous test. There was already a lot of heat induced in the system, so I would expect these temperatures to be slightly higher. I didn't give it a whole lot of time to cool back down to ambient temperature. We see the AC inlet temperatures at about 153 degrees after an hour, which is still significantly lower than when my car was overheating. I would see it get over 220, 240 degrees Fahrenheit. So after running this test, I know it's not the charger's cable that's causing any problem. So for the third test, I wanted to see if the position of the handle of the charger had any effect. So what I did is I put a stand underneath the handle and I pushed it up so that it was straining the cable upwards. I wanted to see if this was going to cause poor contact with the charging pins. And looking at the data here, something did happen. For the first 50 minutes or so, you will see that the graph looks very similar to the previous two tests. We topped out at about 151 degrees on the AC inlet temperature. So you'll see here, after about 50 minutes, the car did cancel the charging session. And for whatever reason, it dropped to 0 kilowatts and just stopped charging completely, which is contrary to what these software updates I recently had should have done. It should have just derated to 5 kilowatts or so. So for whatever reason, that did not happen here. And because all the temperatures are in line with the other tests, the only thing I can think of is that the EVSC, the charger itself, overheated and needed to just stop completely. But that's purely speculation. So for the fourth test, I wanted to simulate a much hotter day. So I placed a space heater in the trunk area, blasting directly towards that side of the car for probably a half an hour to 45 minutes and let it just heat up as much as possible. And I kept it running the entire test. And I did this to simulate either a random hot day here or consistently hot days down in the south, like in Texas or New Mexico or Arizona. And you will see here that all the temperatures are significantly higher. You will see that the AC inlet maxed out at about 163.5 degrees. The inside of the wiring bundle topped out at 133 degrees. So it was about 20 degrees higher than we had previously seen. But again, these are still nowhere near as high as I saw prior to taking the charge port apart. Now again, like the previous test, at about 55 minutes or so, the charging session derated again. But this time, instead of stopping completely, it derated to about 4.8 kilowatts, and it just sat there. So for whatever reason, this test did what it should have done, and I don't really know why. And because all those other tests were run for only an hour, I also ran a test at 2 hours to see how it was going to plateau in terms of temperature. So I ran another test, this time with the Autel charger, with the Autel cable for 2 hours. The ambient outside air temperature was about 60 degrees, so a little bit cooler than these previous tests, but you will see here that the temperatures maxed out at about 145, 146 degrees after 2 hours. If you extrapolate this graph, it's probably not going to go above 155, 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And I will say these maximum AC inlet temperatures that I am seeing are in line with testing I've done on the electrified Genesis GV70. It's been an hour and almost 20 minutes. What are we sitting at? 158 degrees F. So it's not even close to overheating. And if it hasn't overheated by now, then it's not going to overheat at this point. This has already been soaking for over an hour. All the heat that's going to get in there has gotten in there. The GV60 as well as the Ioniq 6. So it's been an hour and 20 minutes. We're still sitting at 11 kilowatts. It has not derated. The VCMS AC Inlet 1 temperature is hanging out at about 181 degrees Fahrenheit. So I get the impression that these are the temperatures that the charge port should be sitting at on a 48 amp charger. So at this point, I don't really know what else to tell you guys. I can no longer experiment with this issue because I don't have the issue anymore. I'm pretty happy that my car now charges successfully at 48 amps. For the most part, there were those 2 instances where it did derate after 55 minutes, but you can see this most recent test of 2 hours, it charged perfectly fine. And I basically charge at 48 amps all the time now without any issue. I do have some insider information that I want to share with you that came directly from somebody internal to Hyundai. So this person told me that the entire issue stems from an issue with the charging port sensor. That would be that thermistor we were investigating. An erratic communication or invalid data being received by the BMS. They also tell me that this same issue is causing fluctuations in DC fast charging speeds. They're saying that it is a communication issue between the BMS, the charge port module, and a DC fast charger. So it sounds like it's a thermistor issue, but I don't really see a thermistor issue. It's reading accurately for the most part for me. So I don't really know. This is what somebody in the know is telling me, so I'm gonna believe their information here. They also tell me to make sure that you guys get the ICCU software update done to the car. The update optimizes the communication between the temperature sensor and the car to prevent all these issues that we are having. And I know some of you are still experiencing overheating problems, but they said this is there to try and prevent those issues going forward. So you people that are kind of holding out on getting these updates done, I highly recommend you do it. They're also changing some calibration values when it comes to how the throttling takes place. Now next year, the Ioniq 5 is likely going to be getting the North American Charging Standard connector during its mid-cycle refresh. But maybe the NACS connector uses different thermistor placement that is more accurate. Maybe the pins that a NACS connector uses are more robust. Maybe they're more reliable in the connection that they make with each other. And because the cables are bigger with a NACS connector, maybe it dissipates heat much more effectively, thus leading to less overheating of the charge port. I'm not here today to give a definitive answer of what's causing the problem. To me, it seems like it is a connection issue with the pins. The second I took all the pins out of the charge port and put them back in, now all of a sudden it charges perfectly fine. The wiring didn't change. Maybe it's the position of the thermistor temperature sensor. I don't really know. I just wanted to present you guys with this information. You guys can come to your own conclusions here. Everything's speculation right now. I don't know what we're going to hear with the lawsuit. Hyundai is going to have to speak up in court at some point, so we should find out more information. The law firm is very open with talking to me about things, so as I find out more, I will be sure to report it to you guys. And I just want you guys to know how much I feel for you. I have seen your photos and your issues. People not being able to charge at 24 amps, 32 amps. It is truly ridiculous. I want to give a special thanks to everybody who helped out with this investigation. I talked to 4 or 5 electrical engineers and then the internal contact at Hyundai. It was really great to be able to bounce information back and forth off of each other and kind of think about this from a more analytical standpoint. But anyway, guys, let me know what you think about all this information down in the comment section. If you need some accessories for your Ioniq 5 or your Ioniq 6 or your GV60, check out links to my stores in the description below. And if you like today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. It really helps me out. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everybody.